Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this special edition of Tanim Graun. We're bringing this to you as a special program, part of the Australia Week, being run by the Australian High Commission. My name is Alan Bird. Today's discussion is on the private sector in Papua New Guinea, opportunities and challenges for rural communities. We want to explore ways in which the private sector, working together with government and other partners, can drive economic growth in rural areas throughout Papua New Guinea. Now, as we all know, some 80% of Papua New Guineans actually live in rural areas and are the ones in the most need. Many of them lack basic services to things like health, education, and of course financial inclusion. So what are we doing to address this complex situation? While the government can help create the enabling environment, it is really the private sector that has to step in to help create the employment we need and to improve living standards in these areas. Whether they be workers, subsistence farmers, or in many cases, some of them are just small entrepreneurs starting up. Strengthening and expanding access to markets through private sector involvement is one way that we can help secure better incomes for those in these areas. We're lucky today to have secured a governor of all things to be on our panel, and you've welcomed him already, but Governor Jufa, thank you so much for joining us. We have Ivan Pamoliu, who works for the Investment Promotion Authority. Actually, he's the boss. We also have Patricia Kasman. Now, Patricia has done some interesting work in expanding retail into rural areas, and I'll let her talk about that afterwards. Welcome, Patricia. Paul Thornton is from Bank South Pacific. He's the General Manager Retail, and BSP is, of course, the largest bank in Papua New Guinea. And of course, we're really fortunate to have you. Benson is co-founder of Mind Garden Projects, and he'll tell us a little bit about that as we move on. Now, with that in mind, I was going to ask this question to Minister Maru. I'm going to have to push it off to you, Ivan, and you can do your best here. What is the government doing to support private sector-led economic growth, especially in rural communities?
Let me start by, I guess, reflecting on a number of things that our government's doing, and I'm sure Governor will at some point add his own views about that as well. But we have a situation where a number of our very key issues need to be addressed. One of which, of course, you mentioned, which is infrastructure, and you find quite a bit of focus, at least in the budgetary process. You find government's announcements focusing on trying to build key infrastructure, particularly in the district levels, and you see a little bit of effort going there just to ensure that we have our mobility addressed in terms of rural infrastructure. We have market access being addressed when you begin to allow rural population having access to our district headquarters and to our towns. So in some ways, that's an important issue that our government's addressing. And I think one of the other things that we find in the job that I do, for instance, that getting a skilled and educated population addresses core competency issues when you start thinking about how our population could start becoming involved in economic activities, businesses, getting to be more aware of what opportunities there are.
Let me come to you, Governor. Now, what are you doing in terms of some of these government initiatives to try to improve access for the private sector in rural areas?
I've been there for about 3 years, and the province has been basically neglected, I would say, primarily from a lack of leadership. So our first focus was to do baseline assessments to see what was lacking, where we were, and that's the start. Then to collect data, statistics, so that you can plan. You know, they're the vital aspects of any development effort. You've got to have a starting point, and you've got to know where you are. So with a team of good people, we managed to do that. We looked at all the sectors, and the results were quite shocking and alarming in every sector. It was a poor and sad situation. And it's not only in Oro province, it's in most provinces where districts and stations have actually started to die out. They're deteriorating. Grass is growing, public servants are not in where they're supposed to be. Even the little businesses that used to operate are also starting to close shop. So a lot of the people are drifting into urban areas. But again, it comes back to funding. We have this situation that confronts the nation where funds are not given in a timely manner. You know, they may issue the warrants, which means, yes, we've given you the money. Then you go to the bank and the money's not actually there. You know, so people in the public service can't get out and do the work that they're supposed to do because they don't have the funds to deliver their programs. And it's very frustrating.
Now, being the largest bank in Papua New Guinea, you probably work in some places that most public services don't go to. So what's your take on this, in terms of this infrastructure we're talking about to enable the private sector engagement in the rural areas?
We have got an agreement with the Department of Finance where we can put our sub-branches, our BSP rural sub-branches in government district treasury offices, and we're not paying a rent for that. So the government's made that available. There's also tax credits available, CSO tax credits available, which are available to any bank, but one bank in particular does take that up because we think that this is important for the development of Papua New Guinea. You know, at the end of the day, BSP is a Papua New Guinean company. You know, this is where our roots are, this is where we live, where we breathe. So it's very, very important for us to be going out and developing markets and developing the opportunities for Papua New Guineans to move ahead. If we just focused on the cities, then at some point in time, you know, competition is strong, so, you know, you've got to fight for that. You know, it's okay, I guess, but you really do have to get out there and you have to invest in the people of Papua New Guinea, and that's what we're doing. We don't sit back and we say, oh, it's all too hard, or, you know, security's bad. Yes, we know all of those issues. So, you know, the community does take ownership, but if they don't, then, you know, we're not there as a welcome guest, I don't think, and that's an important thing for us. We need to be welcomed because we've got something special to provide them.
Thank you, Paul. Let's go to an audience question now. Nancy Nema.
Benson, welcome back to Papua New Guinea. Being from both sides of the Torres Strait, what is your view on youth leadership and social entrepreneurship in empowering remote communities? And what are the similarities and differences between Papua New Guinea? Does the private sector have a role, especially in empowering women?
For the last 3 years, from 2012, had been running a leadership academy in Australia, so working with young Indigenous kids around empowering their voices through social action campaigns. So in the last 2 years, we'd launched 10 youth-led social action campaigns, and that really came out of a frustration that I was seeing between a disconnect between the national rhetoric, so what the politicians and the national media was talking about, and then actually the realities at the grassroots, and there was a great disconnect between that communication. My work with young people is around understanding what your underlying values are, how they influence your passions, and how that informs what you stand for and then what you don't stand for. And it's in that place of what you don't stand for that social action can really take place. And so when I think about how we support young people going forward, particularly when we're looking at 40 years since independence this year, what do the next 40 years look like? So that's when we think about generation, that's 2 generations in 40 years. What we'd like to see. And for me, I would really like to see young people not only getting a deeper understanding around economics and going for education, but actually a sense of pride within our communities that, you know, we are New Guineans, that they're here, this is our land. How can we actually do work that actually supports us, our way of life, but then also our villages more broadly. Just on the piece on the private sector, I'm always in 2 minds here. I think it is the role of government to really create the environment for businesses and enterprise to come in and support. But my issue is when private sector has just as much power as government, and then the private sector takes over the role of democracy.
Oh, Governor, I want to ask you, just taking from that, He's got an interesting point. Should we put such a large burden on private sector given the subject that we're discussing now?
Well, I think it's a three-way partnership. It's a partnership between the government, the private sector, and the people. And, you know, we forget our people. We forget that they are very resilient, that they're very talented, and they're very capable. And all we need to do is empower them. They don't want fish. They want to be taught to fish. And we've been making the mistake of constantly giving them things when what we should be doing is looking at how we can use them as well. And the private sector has limitations. At the end of the day, they need to turn over a profit. You know, that's the reality. The responsibility of nation building falls on government. You know, and government has limited resources, but if it manages those resources well, they can do quite a lot. It's the mismanagement of the resources that leads to the gaps that exist, and therefore the lack of infrastructure that we see or we hear of or we experience. As for the people, we're very fortunate. Our people own their own land, and they can take care of themselves. They've been taking care of themselves for 50,000 years, but they need a bit of help in how to live in this modern world, what opportunities we can create for them, and we can empower them. And if you do that, if you create microfinance and opportunities like that, and you teach them the basic things that they need to know to run business and contribute to nation building, they'll do it.
Just make a quick point on that. The one piece that I think is missing out within that narrative is this element of culture and supporting culture. So we don't want to progress to the expense of losing our very strong and culture that's been around for 50,000 years. And I think this is where there's similarities between what Papua New Guinea can learn from Australia and what Australia can learn from Papua New Guinea is how can we actually take culture and also progress in the kind of the Western sense of development and actually put them together and work together.
Thank you, Benson. Now, Pat, I'm going to bring you in here. You're doing some interesting work that involves rural communities.
I've actually had the privilege and opportunity to sit out and work with the communities in the villages. Now, Alan, you mentioned, yes, I'm working out in 3 particular districts. Now, some of you may have heard about the Super V Store project. We were very, very fortunate. We were able to strike a great partnership with BSP as well as some good suppliers. So there's some very good private sector people who are willing to put their hand up and work with us and work with the government. And there are some challenges, but yes, you got to start somewhere. So it's great. And just most recently in Rabaul, we've managed to roll out 8 shops. So in total, we've got 34 around the country. But in Rabaul, we've got 8, and I'll be going back to open a couple more shops. Mind you, these are owned and run by Papua New Guineans. So under our BSP partnership, SVS BSP, and respective districts or local governments, we're able to just assist. Because remember, fundamentally, it's the responsibility of government to ensure that there is an enabling environment so we can create that opportunity for our people to come in and utilize that. And, you know, there's so much out there.
Well done to our women. Let's give them a big hand. Well done. Let's now go to a talk out, and then we'll have a discussion after that segment.
The nationwide microbank was a project of the national government through funding from the ADB. It started off as a WOW microbank in WOW, of all places, and from there it expanded rapidly. So they thought of moving the head office down to Leh. Basically, it was giving out loans at the same time collecting, mobilizing deposits from the public. And it had a license to do that from the central bank. I think in 2006, when the bank was given a full license by the central bank, it also changed its name to Nationwide Microbank. But over the years, the introduction of mobile phone technology and partnerships with digital has sort of eased that burden of giving the reach to the bank to again move back to the rural areas and providing banking services through use of the mobile phone. Once you have people opening bank accounts, that's more or less like a first step to becoming financially literate. And we have a very, very high financial illiteracy rate in Papua New Guinea. And you can see that quite evident in the number of savers that you have in the banking system, which is very, very low. The statistics that are provided is that only 15% of the entire population of Papua New Guinea is banked and 85% are unbanked. So, you know, where do people get their money to save for school fees and so forth? And this is why you have a very, very high rate of borrowing from one-talks. So that all contributes to us pushing for financial literacy and also in the rural areas and also in the urban areas. And partnerships with organizations is one key factor that all microbanks should look at also. If the microbanks need to survive in this market, they need to move also up the level of the pyramid, maybe go into involving with SMEs.
2013, I'm all become work long, place long. Asking more married on banking, mobile banking. And this letter on all been putting me or send me posting money loan, mama long, mobile banking. You know, planning to massive income. Or no clear test long. How by only banking? How by you got wrong? Suppose only banking, you go big money like him, or like him long, him brown, working business something. And this, and that's all I'm all you know, clear to mass long banking. Or come banking like that's all. Long, look for me, it is suppose, what I know bank, he come now. Talk more long, people long, claim more, mama long, how long banking, can something or same. And by all much clear now come more long banking.
MEC lo mi plakos bamplano na baim PMV na golo town hatok logon deposit kind of sen mi plagat agent pinis time mi pla luke mo se mi pla amamas so mi pla sa woki mo lili kol market blo mi pla nam lo mi et mi woki mo lili market blo mi we mi sakame ken deposit la at lo withdraw mo ga deposit so planti ol mama blo me plale o se me pla ol mama le me pla saksi mani lo market o se me pla plani garden cacao banana kaino se no me pla sagolo market no me pla sa salim no me pla paini lilik suga o kerosene lo pla lo light na half money me pla sim kam se me pla tingin one pla money me pla sa pote my side lo kam lo help me lo bikini blomi school fee blonga mo kind of some was man blomi and die so one more kind of lily or something me make him was me deposit na start lo thing bikini me on bla bikini me so I'm school let now at I'm start lo primary make a grade 4 so I'm long bla time blame lo lo patem so me deposit so lo help me lo behind time mo so me bam school fee blonga mo kind of some Os mi amo master solo se mem one pla isi pla we my case mo walking way isi lo mi pla o se mem just bring him service come to lo place way ino give me pla hard time lo paini o se my di card o golo sim bamitonem stay there na fili mo go na go sana lo line you sem dis la kain worote mat so biluke mo sa my case come se te mi si chol mi pla film all form na manam all gimme pla all form ante mal wana ta isi all mi pla film all form so all go na all wana men all puti mi pla on so na
Welcome back. There's another look at banking, I guess. Small microbanks. What do you think, Gary?
Great idea. We budgeted in our province about 500,000 to start with, just for women in business. And it upset a lot of our menfolk. And I said, look, I believe the women are the backbone of our economy. And I've seen women do far better in business. And when they do business, the money or the positive effects flow down, family, community, etc. You're not going to hear about a woman running around playing pokies looking for young guys. That doesn't happen. But that happens a lot in the other side. So I said, we're going to try the women first, okay, give them that opportunity. And it's in, we haven't rolled it out yet, we're still setting up the criteria, etc. But I really think it's the way to go. And I also think that we should also look at youth. That's another group of people that we need to tap into. I see a lot of talented young people. They get out of their schools. You know, there are only 10,000 jobs, and there's about 60,000 of them per year to compete for those 10,000 jobs. I think the education system needs revisiting, because we are teaching our children to get out, get a job, pay their taxes, and we're not thinking about teaching them to get out, do business, to be innovative, to be creative, to maybe even go and live in other countries and do business there.
Benson, in the work that you do, are there any linkages back towards, say, the financial institutions and some of the things that you're trying to achieve with young people?
Yeah, definitely. So in Australia, we have an institution set up for Aboriginal people called Indigenous Business Australia. And a couple of years ago, I was working with a consortium of different businesses to pull together a new investment fund. It was worth $1 million. And this idea was to invest in Indigenous business, to raise it up and invest back into communities. But what we saw when we did the scan of the lay of the land, as in what are the companies out there or organisation banks that are funding small business or small enterprise, where are the opportunities for seed funding? And what we saw is that there's a shortage of the 6 month to the first 2 years for funding for startup organisations. So we're seeing there's no shortage of ideas out there, there's no shortage of opportunities, but there's a shortage of, you mentioned it before, capacity. To be able to take that idea out of your mind, put it onto a piece of paper, translate that into a business plan, and secure some seed funding. And this is where micro-enterprise really plays a strong role. In Australia, we have a number of microfinance institutions. One that sticks to mind is the Good Shepherd, which is run by a fellow called Adam Mooney, who's the CEO. And they're shifting their business to start investing into small and startup enterprise. But they're directly in competition with payday lenders. So I'm not sure if we have payday lenders here. Yeah, which the interest rates are phenomenal, through the roof, and they're actually designed to keep people in debt because that's how they make their money. Now, these are the kind of institutions that we need to get out of our finance sector. They need to be regulated out because we need to create a space in which institutions that actually have who understand that their greatest resource is actually the people that they're investing in, unlike these payday lenders that are actually just hoping for failure.
Ivan, the issue of the SME has come up a couple of times in this discussion. How much of your work in terms of business registration are you dealing with this SME group, and is it growing?
Thanks. The SME, one of the things when the Prime Minister and this government came on in 2011, he announced a 12-point stimulus package for SME, and a couple of key things that were there related to what we do. One was a delivery of a new legislation, the Companies Act, and of course a registry platform that was to be based on online lodgement, and those were the two key things that they assigned to us to do. And by about 2014, we completed the project. We had a new system delivered and launched and rolled out. You could now register companies online. I guess the backdrop of that would be to try and make things a lot easier for not just SMEs, but anybody who wish to register companies or file documents, required documents to do so quite easily. We scrapped off all the search fees that you needed to do to show people like Paul that you're legitimate, so you could pretty much go online and get the extract that you need and go open a bank account. We also delivered a new Companies Act that was certified early this year, February. And it's going through teething process like any new innovation. It does have those periods where you need to work on systems and ensure that the processes are in place. And it's not there yet, but we're quite optimistic about getting a system for Papua New Guineans that is fast. We're turning around, you probably don't know this, but we're turning around application in the last month while our clients are waiting outside the door at our processing floor in Konidobu. So those are our ways of trying to ensure that starting a new business, be it SME or big business, is done efficiently and faster. So we start encouraging a lot more people to get into business.
Let's go to an audience question now. Andrew Kaita.
My question goes to Paul Thornton and Patricia Casman. The banking sector has seen a real growth in recent years, with BSP posting up to 300 million kina in profits annually. How has that impacted on great rural financial inclusion, including new banking technology or expanded financial services in the community?
The first thing I'd like to say about the profits, and you know they're big numbers. We pay an enormous amount in tax, so we give back a lot to the government in the first instance in tax. Then, of a profit of over 300 million kina, 75% of that goes back to shareholders in dividends. And in the case of BSP, the majority of shareholders are Papua New Guinean entities. So our money, in terms of profit and in terms of dividends, stays in the country. It's not repatriated to another country. It stays in the country. So indirectly, there's that money is then used for further development. But having said that, what have we done? Well, I think we are investing greatly into rural areas, because today we've got 44 sub-branches which are operating in rural areas, in district treasury offices or in district areas. We've got 40-odd branches that are operating around the country. We're in some pretty remote locations. We've got a sub-branch in Telefoaming. Not too many people get to Telefoaming very often. We've got sub-branches in the back of, you name it, we've got a sub-branch at the back of there. And then in addition to that, we've invested a lot in our agency network, and Pat can perhaps talk about some of that from a retail perspective shortly. The other big things, the other big investments that we've made is in our technology. We go out now and we open up bank accounts using a Samsung Galaxy tablet. We've had guys who spend 5 weeks at a time, going down the Fly River or going on patrol somewhere, opening up bank accounts for people, and they give them the card and the PIN at the time that they open up the bank account. We gather all the information, we hit the button, that's all uploaded in real time to our computer system here in Port Moresby. Last year we did 30 million mobile banking transactions using BSP's mobile banking. We've got 10,000 EFTPOS devices out there, many of those in very remote rural areas. I think, we're genuinely putting money back into rural areas. We, as I said before, we see this as an investment in the future in Papua New Guinea. 85% of the population live in rural areas. We can't just serve 15% of the population. We've got to, try and serve all of the population to the best of our ability. But we are a company that, has got shareholders that expects a return on their investment. And to date, we've been able to give an adequate return on their investments and at the same time expand our services out to rural locations.
Thank you, Paul. Pat?
Well, good question. All our shops, Super V shops, are actually BSP bank agents. So you can actually open an account, walk in there to our shops, transfer money. One of the great things through the experience that we've had, we're able to, Paul earlier mentioned, set up a blueprint for the customers. So Papua New Guineans, you and I know, sort of daily. What we earn on a fortnight, we'd normally spend all of it, help our one-talks. Not many of us have a discipline of savings. Now, what we've done under the Super V project is we've provided and we've brought banking services right down to the village level. So if you walk to one of our shops, you can open your account. You can actually, 4 of our shops were able to, under the partnership, register under SME banking and access some loans there through BSP loans. So people out in the rural areas who wouldn't normally have had access to the bank loans through this program have been able to engage with bank offices, SME bank offices. Likewise, I think Ivan, through our project, we've registered a lot more Papua New Guineans, we are proud to say. And yes, Paul mentioned, they do accept registration from the LLG. So if you didn't know, you can go and register with NCD if you're based in Moresby and get a trade license. Or you can go down, if you're from the Hiri Central area, you go down to the Hiri LLG, which is located down at Kwikila, and get yourself registered. You can get a trade license there, and the bank will accept that. So these are really interesting developments that are happening at ground level with village communities that I'm working with, and in partnership with the bank and other agencies and other suppliers here. So we're moving forward.
Oh, good news. Moving forward is always good. I now go to another audience question. Simona Pumuye, could you ask your question, please?
What is the role of one-talk system in PNG? Imagining PNG business culture, and it is a help or in demands as PNG becomes increasingly globalized.
Thank you, Simona. Gary.
Yes, thank you, Simona. That's a hard question. I think, the one-talk system, a lot of people criticize the one-talk system. And I'm also bitterly, there are days when I'm really sick and tired of it. I feel like a human ATM machine sometimes.
That's because you're a member of parliament.
Someone's always getting born or dying, or, it seems that there's no benefit from this culture, There's, but actually it can help. And in the past it used to help. It was a system that ensured that everybody were able to at least have something. But that was the culture that existed without materialism coming into play. So now we're living in a globalized world where there's a price tag on anything and everything. The corporate forces that are moving the world and shaping it and how it is have basically placed us in a situation where we have to make changes and adjustments in our culture, in our society. We have to think about where we came from, where we are, and where we're going. In terms of the one-talk system, perhaps there are some good aspects of it that could be used. For instance, there's a village in my province that formed a cooperative society, and they bought shares in BSP, and they did that in the 80s. That village is doing very well. And they've done that with their cocoa, their coffee, and now oil palm. And the chief runs the village. We held our first PEC meeting there, and I can tell you that village, they perform better than any hotel that we've had a PEC meeting at. They were well organized, and I was impressed. Now that's where one-talk system can work, and it's working because they've got a very good chieftain system in place. And so we've started to rebuild the chieftain systems in our electorates because I see that there is benefit there. And say, look, let's not dismantle this system. Let's not say that it's bad. There's some aspects of it that are quite good. You know, we can't do away with the aspects that are probably not good. You know, like turning up and asking for 20 kina for bus fare every time. I said this before, I don't know, on the other show. My uncle sends me a text message every morning, Matthew 7:7. I know he's going to ask me for money. So I'm still looking for a text that I can respond to him. But I think and say you have to work for it, you know. But it's a system that can work. But I think it needs firm leadership, you know. And, you know, I have a lot of people that come to my office and they ask me for money all the time. I go through the process of educating them. I said, look, you chew betel nut, you smoke, how much do you spend per day doing that? And then we add it up. Let's sit down and calculate that. Let's see how much you spend per day doing this. You want school fees? Okay. You spend 5 kina on betel nut, 5 kina on smoke per day. That's 10 kina a day. In one fortnight, that's 100 kina. In a month, that's 200 kina. In 10 months, that's 2,000 kina. That's a lot of money. Why should I pay for your bad habits? You know, and when you go through that process, then they start to understand, you know, what you mean. The hardest word in the English language is no, but you've got to learn to say it. You've got to learn to use it.
Does your language have a word for no?
No.
Go ahead, Vincent.
Midwest Group is one cooperative group where formed by all like-minded people, small farmers, cocoa farmers. To try to help them be self-reliant and try to export straight. Because so far, the cocoa industry inside the meeting, the side blow local buyer, no support team to side the pricing. So, cocoa has been come in the 1980s, have been come, but industry no been come out. The price to have been low. All month no been clean. All no uses cocoa was one black and major cash crop lol. All busy lo garden na cocoa lusim na stuff. Imito fermentary na only no been buy more weight been low right price. That's why all man neglecting cocoa na stuff. Time we have been formed in 2012. We have got intention because we have been partner with the Mamo an export company blow all cocoa cooperatives and in it lo corporate plan blow cocoa board all been organizing the form this la. Our line been export but I got weak management so and been die. So time we start lo 2012, we have export direct anid lo mamo. We have buy more dry bean. We have going sell wet bean. We have sustain. We have lo nem road and open up. We have export. We think we'll try more donor funding. Na try bisa animal proposal na salim lo na. We still work like say one em right donor em funding more like kind of initiative. So we can apply the funding. Big plan masalo album farmers plan na. We look through the breakthrough na export midla it. Aim big dream and because we realizing this la full benefits blow hard work blow. Instead lo plan namal man na katim kam na at the end of the day you mix you one the peanut na finish. Available help him on local initiative or some capacity or so financial side or assist him. That's why me film say me see me go through lol. All business I'm film heavily. It's all too all gets like an profit mindset so I'm hard. Government, all the writing proposal. Writing na. Sawa pesa. Money come going to sell district or going to sell PSIB, DSIB, name go na go lo personal blue man na. Maybe 70% personal emoluments blue public servant na 30% you to lo burgim go lo all on my infrastructure. I'm not work out. So you may go na thousands of kina you may spend lo proposal na go come say kim chila officer go come officer to go go finish. So improve the time limit.
I like that bit about the frustration at the end and him just throwing his hands.
I agree with him. I agree with him. Yeah, I'm frustrated too, you know.
But how do we get past this? I mean, you can see there's people out there in the community who are actually trying. In spite of the fact that, like he said, you know, he spends thousands of kina writing proposals and he's at his wit's end. But they're still trying.
Alan, the problem is the public service machinery, which has never been upgraded since 1975. It's the same old machine, it's rusty and old and tires are flat and driver went to sleep and no one's bothered to restructure this machine, you know. That's the machine that's supposed to deliver government programs. But we have to think about how the world is moving in today. And most governments are not doing that anymore. What they're doing is they're actually a regulatory monitoring and review oversight role. That's what governments are doing. While the focus is on private-public partnership arrangements. You know, let the corporate sector do what it's best at doing, and government does the review, monitoring, regulatory effort, you know. I think that's what needs to be done. I'm frustrated. We've given our money, my PSIP, I never touch it. It goes straight to the administration, because that's the vehicle that's intended to do that. But if that vehicle's not moving, what do? You know, and the farmers, they go to the public administration, they get frustrated, they bring those same proposals to me. I've got piles of proposals, you know, and I said, look, what am I going to do? The administration is supposed to do that work. It gets caught up in this red tape bureaucracy that goes nowhere, you know, and submission after submission, and they go meeting after meetings. Treasury releases the warrants, but the monies come late, and then when the monies do come, it's diverted to other activities that were unbudgeted for, you know. What do?
You're a governor, and you're despairing. Tell us, who can actually fix this? If we've got this monster machine sitting there, and I'm sure all of us would like to know who can actually fix this.
Actually, we did.
If you can't, as a governor, with respect.
Well, what I proposed the Special Parliamentary Committee on the Review of the Public Service, and that was endorsed by the government. Because I'm a governor, I can't chair that Special Parliamentary Committee. So I offered it to Biraki Misopa, who did a great job. And it's with the cabinet at the moment. And basically the suggestion or the recommendation is that we have to corporatize the public service machinery, you know. You have to do away with the Public Service Management Act, you know, and put in place a contract system that puts everybody on contract, from T-boy up to CEO. Merit-based appointments and promotions are based on merit, and their contracts tie them down to performance, to deliverables that can be measured and should be measured and so forth. And we use technology, you know. And you have a streamlined government machine that actually functions. You know, right now we can't sack these public servants. They turn up to work at 10, disappear at 11. The only time when they're there, they're typing their proposals for church or Mothers Union or whatever, you know. But they're not working, you know, and you can't get rid of them.
I think you mentioned this earlier when you spoke. It's great that you have allocated funds, you have the warrants, but the money ain't there. So if you don't have the money, and I'm an officer in the province, I'm not going to turn up to work because I don't have funding to ensure that my project is rolled out, you know. So it's all of that put together, I think, and it's really important that number one should be our people down in rural areas.
Globalization is such that nowadays you could actually leap frog and export directly from the village. And we did some work. I'm not sure whether it's this group or another group, but we actually brought some importers right to the village and talked to these guys. And all they needed to them was have a bit of road access coming out. They were willing to address quality and packaging, and they'll be able to actually export right out of the cooperatives to the market. And that comes with ICT if you have it running and reliable.
Interesting.
Well, Alan, in Rabaul, 10 years ago, they would have to go to the actual buying points to check the prices. So you waste your fuel and time. You're moving from one buyer to the other. Whereas now, they just pick up the mobile phone and ask the different buyers, what's your price today? And they go to the best one. So yeah, telecommunications is absolutely important.
Yeah.
There we go. We go to thank you all. We'll go to an audience question. We have Jacqueline Velekiri.
My question goes to Governor Jufa. If 80% of Papua New Guineans are directly reliant on agriculture, with about 3% of cultivated land being used for export cash cropping, what strategies and policies are being taken by the government and donor agency to develop this important sector? Thank you.
Well, I mean, that's a very interesting question, and I'm not going to be able to help myself. I'm going to insult a lot of people in government. I personally think that the agricultural sector is just very grossly mismanaged. But I think also that efforts are being made by some individuals and some organizations to try and improve that. For land, you know, it's the only security our people have. And so they're very concerned about it. And each and every time there's an example of their land being taken for use, they've suffered. Let's look at the SABLs, for example. Now that was a brilliant scam put together by companies that just wanted to cut trees. And they convinced the government at that time to agree to this, some governments ago. And on the pretext of freeing up land for agricultural purposes, they entered various areas and basically cut all the timber and took them away and left nothing, you know. And they had these huge agreements, and you know, they gathered a few landowners, and all the landowners turned up. And our people are very trusting people. You know, if someone turns up with a briefcase and a suit and he speaks fancy English, well, he must be an honest person. That's the way we think, you know. And so these companies turned up with all these great ideas and said, oh, we'll plant all these things and you'll have a hospital and a bridge and a road there. And so why not? The landowners felt, you know, hey, that's not a bad deal, and we can do this. But what happened? All their trees were cut down. There was nothing left there. They suffered significantly, and you know, much of their land was taken away from them. Some instances, they couldn't even enter their own land or their own territory because the laws were used against them. And so landowners are quite reluctant to free up land because these are just examples of where, whenever such things have happened, they've suffered significantly. We can look at what's happening in Fiji and many other parts of the Pacific, where they have developed land trusts and land boards, and they basically manage that process, find genuine investors, you know, not transnational criminal organizations, but actually genuine investors that mean to do good, and bring them into the country and partner them with people who are willing to free up their land, you know. And therefore there is that effort that results in a positive step forward. And the government takes a back step, but protects the interests of the landowners and acts as a mediator between the development partners and the landowners. Such things can happen. I think these are not impossible situations, you know, and the banks are there, the private sector is there. What we've got to do as government is to make sure that we screen the people that are coming into our economies, that we carefully screen them and we know who's coming in, and we let the right type of investor come in. People who will respect our laws, abide by them, respect our landowners, and work with us to develop our economy.
I'm thinking more of some of our landowners out there who might be watching the show later, sitting in the audience. From a bank's perspective, all of those landowners that are out there working, putting together ILGs and those sorts of things, and they're interested in doing something with their land. What kind of advice would you give them, representing, say, BSP's opinion?
Well, we have difficulty with, the lack of availability of title over land. I mean, at the end of the day, if we have to foreclose on a loan and we don't go into loans trying, with the view that we're going to foreclose, but, that's an impossibility in all cases. I mean, we need to know how we can get out of these things. So I think land tenure is, a critical issue. There's certainly been all sorts of alternatives offered in the past about, getting not using the special agricultural lease per se, and getting title over it, but, the landowners themselves, doing something so that they can leverage, the valuable asset that they do have, or part of that asset. So I think, perhaps, that's something that as time goes on, people need to be looking at. But once again, they've got to go in with it, with the right ideas and the proper knowledge.
We have a Twitter question, and this is from Kimberly Akil. What are the benefits of the private sector in rural communities, and what's in it for them if they do go there? Given that we're one of the hardest places to do business in, what is the incentive for private sector? We're probably talking big private sector here, not so much the guy in the village.
Yeah, and we found, Alan, that's been quite a challenge, just getting people to consider rural Papua New Guinea as possible investment destination. We carry a large body of data, certification, for instance, and you find that a lot of the concentration on investments, be it in real estate or in manufacturing or in services. A lot of those are concentrated on the urban sectors. Very few. There's only a handful of very, very brave foreign investors or business people actually going into rural Papua New Guinea, and it reflects on some of the difficulties of doing business in our country. The World Bank undertakes surveys every year and puts out a perception index which ranks our country against about 189 other countries, and we're ranking 133 for 2015 over 189, and that's down from 113. So the bigger the figure, the worse off we are, basically. So what it tells you is that in terms of a number of key indicators, for instance, starting a business, our ability to get credit, winding up contracts, getting electricity, some of those key areas of work that we need to start a basic business, it's not as good as we would want it to be. And there's a number of reasons why we're having a regression in terms of the ranking. One of which would be that we're not doing anything and other countries are doing something to reform their systems, and therefore they've had some progress, and that pushes down our ranking to a lower level. The survey is done in such a way that they pick up construction as a key sector, and they evaluate on the basis of the capital city. So they're actually evaluating on how easy it is to do business in Port Moresby. So that's you'd think that doing business in Port Moresby is a lot easier for people trying to establish businesses. So taking that and extrapolating that to the districts and the rural areas, you probably see a different sort of ranking as well. So that continues to be our challenge. Yeah.
We are running close to our finish. I'm going to have one last question from the audience. Charles Kaprangi.
Apart from extractive industries in the mining sector, we also have the fisheries, we also have logging. Are there legal obligations or MOAs or by legislation? Are there certain parts of agreements that try to get sectors like the logging or businesses in the logging industry, fisheries, to actually provide and support communities more, like what's happening in the extractive industries?
In terms of direct answer to the question, there are actually terms of the agreements, whether it's in forestry, fisheries, or outside of the extractive, that obliges companies to actually do things.
But what you're saying is we're not enforcing them. Is that it?
Yeah,
I mean,
compliance.
Coming back to what you're saying, Governor,
compliance
right?
is a major issue.
I mean, there are many examples of those laws not being enforced. And all these laws are there. We create laws all the time. Just yesterday we passed new migration laws, you know, about detaining people who are unlawfully in the country, you know. And
I thought we always had those laws.
Now, we had those laws, but the enforcement and application of those laws was always a problem, you know. And we would, for instance, when I was working with customs, we detained many people who were unlawfully in the country, and some fancy lawyer would go and get a order to release these people using the Bail Act, you know, which was illegal, because under the Migration Act, anybody who's unlawfully in the country must be detained. You know, that's the law, and every other country enforces that law, except PNG, you know. And that's the problem with fisheries and forestry. I mean, these people are illegally operating in a particular area, doing illegal things, all in breach of how many laws that we've got. And the enforcement agencies simply aren't doing their work, you know. That's the problem. These agreements actually drafted, written in contract forms, you know, say in the forestry sector. And it's all stipulated there. The National Forest Authority is the organization that's supposed to enforce those contracts, but they never do. Okay, now one example in our province, and we're the only province that canceled our SABLs. Okay, not only did we stood with our landowners and we canceled them, and we took all the logging machines and we locked them up, you know. I sent my officers there to do that. In July, we are going to revisit the remaining camps. Most have left, but there's a few there, and we're going to go down the line. And every camp that is in breach of various laws, every person that is in breach of their employment laws, we are going to physically take them to the airport and kick them out, you know. And it can be done. So in July, we're going to do that as an example. You might want to send your film crew to film this, because it'll be an example.
We'll do a follow-up show, yeah.
We can do it there. We can bring some of those guys, we'll handcuff them, and they can answer some of the questions.
Yeah, that's going to make for great TV. Yeah. So, Governor, I said before that you know, disinfectant is the best thing for weeding out infections. So I think you're actually the disinfectant that we need for our nation.
Yeah, but you know, they will attack you too, because these are people who have a lot of money. And you know, they sponsored the political upheaval in my province, and they've done all types of things to try to derail me. You know, they've gone to town, because that's what evil does. Evil lurks in its evil layers, where it has benefited, where it has prospered, and it has profited. And it's going to attack you. And if you stand in a corner in a white robe with a trembling finger and saying very meekly that this is wrong, you think they're going to listen to you? No, they have fangs and claws, and they will strike you. And you've got to expect and accept that you will be bitten and hit and attacked too. But you've got to be resilient, you've got to continue. Because behind you are all your people and the future generations that deserve a better home. And you've got to rid these people and do it.
Join us next time on Tanim Graun. Na tingim, tok tok blong you by Tanim Graun.